Welcome to the Keeping It Israel podcast with Jeff Feuders, where Jeff and his guests talk everything Israel as it relates to Christian faith and the church. If you are a Christian and you stand with Israel, you will be encouraged and challenged by this podcast. And if you're not so sure about the whole Israel thing, you need to learn how your faith connects with Israel and why standing with Israel matters. Now here's Jeff with today's guest.
Hey, my name is Jeff. Welcome to the Keeping It Israel podcast today. And today, my guest is Avie Esakov. Avie is Jewish, and from the GTA, he is a tour operator from the Greater Toronto area, but has an interesting history. He'll share a little bit about that with us. He's also going to share what things are like on the ground in Israel right now. He's just come back from a trip about 3 days ago. And then a special treat for you, a couple of recent discoveries, one in the Galilee region and one up around outside Jerusalem. He's going to share a little bit about some of those discoveries as well. I hope that you will enjoy this podcast. Just a word for those of you who are listening to the podcast via audio. If you're interested in any of the photos that we're sharing on this podcast, you can go to our YouTube channel, First Century Foundations, and you can see the podcast there on video. Anyway, let's go to my interview with Avie Esakov. Well, welcome to the podcast today. And today on the Keeping It Israel podcast, I have as my guest my good friend, Avie Esakov. Did I say that right, by the way?
Avie Esakov, that's fine.
Esakov, okay. So Avie, without me explaining too much, why don't you tell us who you are and how did you get to this point in your life?
I'm an African, mind you, have the wrong complexion, and went to Israel in 1964 as a teenager and studied, then went through law school. Didn't really like law, went into tennis equipment, and then my ex-wife found a little advertisement for a tour guides course, and so I did the tour guides course. I guided in Israel for some 30-something years, and then found myself in Canada in the year 2000. In 2001, nobody was traveling to Israel, and we had a group of Jewish people, visibly Jewish, going to Israel from B'nai B'rith, Canada. And I was leading that group. Christians for Israel got wind of it, and so they joined the journey. We had, I think, just under 40 people going, 20 of whom were Christians. And the Ministry of Tourism brought TV to the airport when we left. When I got back, I was headhunted by a company who wanted to renew their Israel connection. And so I started sending people to Israel. Back in 2001, 2002. And I've been doing that ever since. My company now is Unique and Inspiring Journeys, and I've just returned from a visit to Israel.
Okay. Now, when you and I met, you were kind of in the middle of what you're talking about, taking Christian groups in particular to Israel. And during that time, I think we connected around 2006 or 7. And during that time, you have actually sort of become, in my denomination at least, the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, we lovingly refer to you as Mr. Israel. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you sort of get entrenched in the PAOC and helping churches?
Well, the very first time I took a pastor's journey, it was the help of the General Superintendent, Bill Morrow, who's a very good friend. And we took several large church leaders from PAOC on a journey to Israel. And it was a very, very special journey because, again, nobody was visiting Israel. Subsequently, many of those church leaders have joined me going to Israel. And Bill indicated to me that there's an annual conference or a biannual conference that the organization has, and that each district has an annual conference, a biannual conference as well. And so over time, I've attended virtually all of these conferences over the last probably 14 years. And on several occasions at the plenary of the PAOC national conferences, I addressed the plenary from the podium. And so, yeah, Luckily for me, I've become Mr. Israel in the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada and through the connection with Dave Wells in Power 21 as well.
Excellent. Well, we know that you've helped a number of churches, district superintendents, the general superintendent take trips. And here's the thing right now, tourism in Israel, because of this situation we find ourselves in the world, it's suffering right now. You've just come back from Israel, correct?
Yes, I just got back 3 days ago. It was a very interesting endeavor. It goes back to March 7. My son had his bar mitzvah March 7, thank God. And then March 9, Israel mandated a 14-day quarantine for anyone entering Israel. I had a group leaving on March 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. We had to pull the plug on that one. And we've now subsequently had to cancel all the journeys for 2020. So I decided once my daughter had set up vacation time to leave her apartment for 3 weeks, I decided that since I had to be 2 weeks quarantine in Israel, I'd go to her apartment, which is what I did. I spent the 2 weeks in quarantine in Israel and then started traveling through Israel and really had a wonderful, wonderful time.
Now, what was the purpose of your travel? Was it personal or?
Well, it's a combination. I have 12 grandkids in Israel, and so 6 months is a long time not to see your grandkids, especially when I've been going sort of like once a month. And with groups scheduled all the way through July of this year, I had a very promising agenda of flying basically once a month to Israel. The reason for me traveling at this point was to actually get a feel for what's going on the ground in Israel as one travels through different areas. And I only focused on the Galilee, the area around Tel Dan and Tzipori, and then Jerusalem, several occasions to Jerusalem.
Very good. So from what you observed and what you're hearing in the industry, what's the outlook for tourism in Israel? What is this gonna look like, and can you even project any kind of timing going forward?
I would be very reluctant to project a timeline. I have groups scheduled for January, February, March of next year. Time will tell if that's going to work. In the meantime, around about the first week of August, the Ministry of Tourism put out a notice that come August 16, there would be a change that they're going to announce about incoming tourism from what's called green countries, and Canada is one of the green countries.
Okay.
Unfortunately, however, the numbers in Israel have gone crazy, and it's mainly because instead of dealing with it on a purely medical issue, they're dealing with it in a political issue, and so there are limitations to what can be done because of internal politics, and that's creating havoc in certain neighborhoods, which so happen to be the Arab population of Israel and the ultra-Orthodox populations of Israel. Right. And in those neighborhoods, we have what's called red cities that probably are going to be shut down over the next few days. Came August 16, the Ministry of Tourism didn't make any announcement about tourism, but they did announce that Israeli passport bearers coming into Israel are no longer required to have a 14-day quarantine. That's the first step to indicate that a green country will be able to travel to Israel. And the question is when they're going to do that. One of the other issues that I witnessed was what's called capsule or bubble tourism. The concept is that most sites are open, but they limit the number of people that can enter the site at a given time. So when I went to Tzipori to take a day course with the person in charge of water, the history of water in Tzipori and in the Galilee, it was limited to 25 people. So we were told that if we don't show up, we should please tell the organizers so they can let someone else in
Right.
case you don't show. It was very interesting to see that because everybody had a face mask and we kept social distance, and that's a requirement wherever you go. It was very interesting to visit Sipori after about probably 10 years since I last was there, to see the extent of the excavations that they've extended in Sipori. So basically, tourism is still at a standstill in Israel, yet internally, Israelis are going all over the show, much like in Canada, Canadians are going all over Canada.
Yeah, it's given us the opportunity to see our own countries. Very, very, very interesting kind of spin. You know, my wife and I love to travel, and we tend to be in Israel 3-4 times a year usually. And we also like to go other places and to the US as well. That's been very different this year for us, you know, and anybody I know that's listening or experiencing the very same thing. I'm a little jealous, you know, that you got to go to Israel, and but for us, you know, to go and quarantine for 14 days is just not financially feasible at all.
There's also, right now, the requirement is that any individual not Israeli passport holder from a green country has to receive permission from the consulate to go to Israel on certain conditions that they have to fulfill. The basic concept, though, is COVID-19 is something that each individual is responsible for, and hence this whole bureaucracy that is being set up. Hopefully, once they do open the borders for tourism, that bureaucracy will again be sidelined with perhaps a waiver of sorts that will be drafted for people to understand what it is they're undertaking. In the meantime, the travel insurance issue is a very, very big problem. Up until March 15, if I remember correctly, any event that happened to an insured was covered, including COVID-19, between February 20th and about March 15, roughly. But as of that point, when a federal travel advisory was issued, and it hasn't been rescinded, to avoid all unnecessary travel period, which is completely new in the world, tourism has been shut down, and the travel insurance policies will not cover COVID-19. I found 2 travel insurance companies that will provide us with cancel for any reason. It's called KFAR, and you're insured up until 7 days prior to departure for 75% of the value of the journey that you're taking, and if it's within the 7 days, 50%. I found an Israeli insurance company that can insure people who have their own insurance for medical related COVID-19 issues. So we have that set up to sort of provide peace of mind for people,
right?
With that view of at least you will be insured, even though most travel insurance companies will not insure. The one policy which I find very interesting is one where, in most cases, if you receive a travel credit voucher, then insurance won't pay. There's one insurance policy that I found that will pay if you refuse to take or you deny the travel credit voucher. They will pay, again, up to 75% or 50% of the value, depending on the timelines.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Well, you were able to visit a number of places while you're there. And of course, you mentioned you're in your 3rd day of quarantine back here now in Canada. You've got about 11 days to go. And I hope somebody's looking after you. I hope somebody's bringing you groceries and doing all that kind of stuff.
Gateway.com, it works well.
Okay, very good, very good, very good. You mentioned the water system in the Galilee and this recent discovery in Sipori. I'm going to throw a picture up on the screen here if I can, and talk to me a little bit about what has been discovered here. We'll make sure this hopefully works.
So it's remarkable that wherever Israel does any earthwork, the Israel Antiquity Institution has to excavate. And in this case, people are standing behind a ritual bath, a mikveh. You can see the mortar and plaster on segments of it where there are 3 men standing, and just underneath them, there's a line of stone. And underneath that, you can see the mortar that covered or sealed the ritual bath. The unusual thing about this ritual bath is that it's discovered in an area about 1 kilometer away from Tsipori, but there's no family home that's been found nearby, nor have they found any evidence of olive oil or wine produce. Generally speaking, mikveh, ritual bath, will be found either in close proximity to the temple for purification reasons, as you came to Jerusalem on any of the feasts, or if you're producing olive oil or wine to make it a kosher product, you had to be spiritually pure before you went in to harvest or make the wine or the oil.
Right.
And so right now, the idea is to excavate. This is on a ridge that is roughly about 2 hectares big. And so the road will be covering the area of this ritual bath. I helped crowdfund the moving of that ritual bath to a kibbutz nearby. And the kibbutz so happens to have a regular ritual bath on the kibbutz, and now they'll have an antique ritual bath that they hope to plaster and use in the future.
Fantastic. I find those things so intriguing, and I know that people listening will as well. By the way, if you're listening to the podcast and you want to see the image that we just shared, you can also go to our YouTube channel and watch the podcast there. This is now, you say they moved this ritual bath to a kibbutz
They haven't
nearby?
moved it yet. They have the funding to move it to a kibbutz that's about, as the crow flies, probably 1 kilometer west of the ritual bath, 2 kilometers west of Tsipori.
Very, very interesting. I guess they do that, piece by piece, and then reassemble it?
No. They have to sink concrete. They have to drill holes around the ritual bath. Then they have to put the whole. On one side, they have to open a trench big enough to slip metal rods underneath the width of the ritual bath. Pour concrete to connect it to those metal rods. And then when they lift it, hopefully nothing is going to shift. And they'll just take it in a pod and carry it to the kibbutz nearby.
Wow, that's very cool.
I don't know if you remember when they found the ancient boat in the mud in the Sea of Galilee.
Yes.
They had to come up with some idea, some way of getting it to a place where they could conserve it. And so there they dug out a huge, a trench around the boat.
Mm-hmm.
They covered the boat in styrofoam, the lining of a refrigerator has got styrofoam in there.
Yes.
So there's like a canister that you have, and you just push a little button and go shh, and they actually encased the boat in styrofoam. Then they opened the dam that had held because that season there was sufficient rain, and they had to build a dam to prevent losing the boat to the water again.
Right.
And then they opened that dam, and the boat sailed for the first time in 2,000 years. That's the kind of stuff that we do. And it's the same, in Tsipori, the same conserver, the person who was in charge of conserving the boat, conserved a bronze bull that was found under one of the water pool in Tsipori. Very interesting find.
That's amazing. I love the story of the boat, and we go and watch the video every time when we're there with the group. It is incredible to see how that they preserved all of that and were able to actually move it and put it on display there. Phenomenal.
Even more remarkably, when the boat was first housed in a container outside the museum where they were doing the restoration, they had to put cellulose in place of the water because the wood was waterlogged. And so for about 5 years, all you could see was milk, but there wasn't a group that I guided of Christians who didn't go to visit that container and look at nothing because the boat was there.
Wow. That is pretty incredible. By the time I started going, it was already on display. It was about 2006 or so.
Didn't you go with your father with us?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was my first trip.
Yeah.
My first trip, I don't know if I ever told you any of my story, but I was a pastor for 30 years, almost 20 some years at that point, and really had never given much credence to the idea of going to Israel. I hadn't even thought about it much, felt like it was much of a priority, anything like that. And it was my dad who finally convinced me to go. And well, you can see now, I have sort of done an about face on that attitude, but I think it's important for every pastor to go. And we actually have been working on a project to get students to go, Bible college students from our college in Peterborough. And we were supposed to be in Israel the last 2 weeks of August. But as you said, everything in Israel has been closed down. And so that tour didn't happen. But we're looking forward to hopefully planning that again for next year.
Next year, yeah.
Yeah.
Bear in mind that you might be looking at temperatures between 38 and 42 degrees. The last 4 days of August were that hot.
I warned them. We had a conversation with with the faculty, and they said, look, this is the time of year that works best for us. And I said, well, it's super hot in Israel then, but if that's what you want to do, we planned some activities around being in and out of the water.
Inside. Yeah.
A fair bit, and more air conditioned type things. But yeah, we're still looking to do it. It should be good. Hey, there was another discovery just recently outside of Jerusalem, and I'll share this screen. I've got about 5 pictures here of this, but I want you to talk to us about this discovery. You seeing that?
Yeah. So what we're looking at are what are called ProtoAeolic. They've been given the name of ProtoAeolic mainly because when Schumacher about probably 200 years ago found them, he didn't know what they were, but they looked like Ionic capitals, and so he looked for a name, couldn't find a name, and somebody suggested Aeolic, like Ionic, but it's not the same date. So what we're looking at is some kind of an important masonry that's part of a huge amount of these stones that have been discovered in Israel. In Megiddo alone, there were 13. But what we're looking at, if you have ever taken a glance at the bottom of a palm tree, a date palm tree in Israel,
Okay.
and you might remember Isaiah 11:1, a shoot came out of the base of Jesse. Basically, what we're looking at is those shoots that come out of the palm tree. Now, the date palm tree, because of the shoots, lasts for eternity. And so when we refer to David as a shoot coming out of the stump of Jesse, we're looking at David for eternity, and David for the Jewish people exists for eternity. So
Wow.
what we're looking at here seems to be the base of a date palm tree. And since it's eternity, it could be some kind of votive stonemasonry that's put into opulent buildings. The other part of what was found, what was unique about these is that they were found one on top of each other. I'm not aware of how many places or how many other places we found one on top of the other. We're not sure yet, because it's an Israel antiquity excavation. We're not sure yet if this was burial or destruction. If it's destruction and they fall one on top of each other, it's pretty unique because there are at least one school of thought led by Dr. Norma Franklin, which says these aren't capitals for structure. These are a votive stone piece that's put into a wall or a column, but not for the support. It's for eternal life.
Okay.
And
Very
these were
interesting.
discovered in Jerusalem. And there you see the one that's been taken out, and the guy's hands are on the other one, still covered. This is in an area called the Governor's Hill, where the United Nations headquarters is. And there's a wonderful promenade called the Hus Promenade, where you see the south side of the old city of Jerusalem. And that particular construction, that particular building that dates back to just after the Assyrian siege, 701 BC. That had a wonderful view of David's city and the old city of Jerusalem just after the siege. It's remarkable in the context of siege and destruction, and within one generation, opulent buildings are going up in and around Jerusalem. That excavation comes adjacent to Kibbutz Ramat Rachel, which is a stone's throw 500 yards south west of there. Yes. And another excavation in Talpiot next to the U.S. Embassy, where they found an administration center that's on one of the hilltops. There are probably 19 of these hilltops going from the old city out south and west in Jerusalem. And for many years, we didn't know what these hilltops were. Albright excavated one of them, and he put a line down the middle. And so all these mounds were called Albright's Arse, excuse my Hebrew. But basically, one of those was excavated near the American embassy in Talpiot, and they found what they've dubbed an administration center in the Kingdom of Judah just after the siege by Sennacherib.
Wow, and these are fairly recent discoveries, aren't they?
These are all excavations that have taken place over the last 18 months, and as this last one that you just showed the photos from, was from about 5-6 months ago, where they've just discovered those stones.
Wow, it's fantastic. I'm always amazed to hear the new things that are being uncovered, and we sometimes are in Israel, and there will be like road construction or a detour around something, and you wonder what's going on over there, and then I come home and I see it on the internet. That's where the road construction was. They found something else. And this discovery, I think, is so significant because it goes back to that kind of first temple era. Yeah. And that's just amazing to me.
Yeah, it's great. And, Route 6, which is one of the major arteries, like 407, the same company, by the way, is running it. When they excavate going around that area, they found the oldest Neolithic village ever. And it's a very big, organized village. Pre-pottery Neolithic was never considered a time where there was sufficient governance to have a village of any size. And yet, in one of the exits from this highway, they discovered a large Neolithic village. This is 10, 15,000 years old. So these are things that happen often in Israel. As the construction goes crazy, so does excavation go crazy. And luckily enough, we find different things at different times. Mm-hmm. I was also very lucky to partake of a group of about 25 odd tour guides with Dr. David Gurevich, whose PhD was on the ancient water systems of Jerusalem. And I've been guiding for many years, and it's amazing how much I learned from one day with David Gurevich about the ancient water systems in Israel.
Incredible. Well, this is awesome. I appreciate you taking some time to talk with us today, Avie, and I wish you extremely well on your next 11 days of quarantine.
Thank you.
You're not prepared, I know, to make any kind of predictions about tourism, but I want to give people some hope. Is a year from now realistic? Is March realistic? What are you thinking?
Well, if we look at the line of the development vis-a-vis Israeli passport holders and entering into Israel, it seems rational to think that should Israel get more of a control of the numbers there, they will go ahead and open up for tourism. And so we're looking at possible January, February dates that still might work for travel to Israel. But realistically, I think if anyone's planning a journey right now, I would say plan for October, November of 2021. By then, perhaps we'll have a vaccine, and that can change the whole scene altogether.
Right. Now, I think people, if we're talking about October, November 2021, people would want some kind of assurance that, should COVID-19 still be a factor at that point, that, there's a way out, that there's some sort of insurance to let them know that, they're not, any money they put up front, they're going to be able to get back. I think that's reasonable, right?
So what we're setting up right now is we're looking at making our terms and conditions a little bit more liberal when it comes to the pandemic, particularly. So we will give assurances to people joining any of our tours that they will get a refund should COVID-19 still impact the viability of their journey. That hasn't been the case with the groups that were on paper for the first 6 months. It's been an established norm to provide a travel credit voucher. And so finding the travel insurance company that will pay out even if somebody does not accept the travel credit voucher was a very important step to making another possible way of giving people their money back.
Right. Okay.
I mean, everybody's been impacted by COVID-19, people in Canada, all over the world. And the extent of the shutdown initially caused some financial strife that we're still dealing with now. And so somebody who is the typical Christian pilgrim who might gather dollars and cents to make a once-in-a-lifetime journey, that kind of outlook isn't a good one for people who gather money to go, and that's once-in-a-lifetime kind of trip. But we can assure people that their money is protected and will be refunded should COVID-19 impact the viability of a group journey.
Okay, that's good. Good to know. Now, people who are listening may want to connect with you. They might want to know a little bit more about the company that you're working with. Give us that information so that we can include it in the podcast.
So I'm at Unique and Inspiring Journeys. My phone number is 1-877-999-8868, and the extension is 424 if you're dialing from outside of the GTA. And inside the GTA, 416-444-6666, and again, extension 424. My email address you have, it's avie@ihtours.com.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we will make sure that we include all that information if people want to reach out and connect with you. I know that if you're listening or watching and traveling to Israel with a group is something that you would love to do, Avie would take really great care of you. And so we just want to encourage you to connect with him. And he is going to plan for you a tour that will definitely go ahead in 2021, right?
Correct. And we do that with an Israeli company that is a unique company, Sarel Tours and Travel, are a messianic organization that I'm dealing with now solely in Israel. And it's a remarkable organization. They have a wonderful studio overlooking David City. We will be having, well, God willing, 2 groups will materialize, Marie Miller and Todd Manuel, and they will have Passover Seder overlooking the area of the Last Supper, which will be broadcast live to Canada. Very
cool. Is that a joint trip that they're doing?
They're not traveling together. They'll be in Jerusalem together.
Okay. So it'll be
Todd Manuel is doing an 11-day journey, which includes Jordan, and Marie Miller is doing a 10-day journey, Israel only. Marie's been to Israel many times. Todd has been to Israel many times as well. Todd was one of the pastors on that original PAOC journey with Bill Morrow.
Yes, right. I believe my friend Doug was as well.
Yes, Doug Ryan was on that one too, correct.
Yeah.
Our friend.
Well,
yeah.
He's been my friend for a long time, but I'll share him with you. That's okay.
Okay.
I don't know if you know, but Doug is a grandfather now.
Yes, I saw that on Facebook and wished him well. Yeah.
Yeah, very proud grandpa.
He's still got 11 to go to catch up to me.
I know. I have 9 to go to catch up to you, but we'll get there maybe. We'll see.
We will. God bless.
Yeah, listen, Avie, great to have you, and God bless you. And we'll connect again soon.
Toda rabba, thank you, and here's to travel to Israel in 2021.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Yep, next year in Jerusalem. Thanks so much.
Well, that was very interesting, and I hope you enjoyed my guest, Avie Esakov, today. Avie is just a wealth of information. Not only is he very, very in tune with what's happening in the tourism industry as it relates to Israel, he's also a wealth of knowledge and information, having been a tour guide in Israel for over 30 years. And what I like about it is that he also stays up to date with what's happening with new discoveries. And we heard a little bit of information today about the mikvah, the ritual bath that was found near Sephora up in the Galilee region, and also the stones that were found outside of Jerusalem that are from the First Temple era. Just incredible discoveries in the last 6 to 18 months. So thank you for tuning in today. If you want to connect with Avie, don't forget his email is avie@ihtours.com, and you can also reach him by phone 1-877-999-8868 at his company, Unique and Inspiring Journeys. And we want to encourage you, if you're looking to go to Israel the next year or two or longer, talk to Avie. He's a great resource. Also, don't forget that First Century Foundations is a ministry. We are a charitable organization that helps ministries in the land of Israel, Christian and Messianic ministries. And we can receipt you for your donations both in the United States and in Canada. Just go to our website, www.firstcenturyfoundations.com/donate, and you can help our ministry there. We would appreciate so much you partnering with us. Looking to have you partner on a monthly basis if that's something that you would be interested in doing. It would just help us so much. God bless you today. It's been great to have you with us on the podcast. And remember, as Christians, we stand with Israel.